It's a warm autumn day in 1141, and on the road towards the city of Gloucester, a noblewoman is slowly galloping on her horse. The woman is exhausted from travelling and close to fainting. The journey towards Gloucester has been an arduous task for her, yet some of her companions have fared much worse. Robert of Gloucester, the main commander and driving force for the Angevin cause in England, has been captured by the royal forces led by Queen Matilda, near the city of Winchester. The Angevin forces had been trapped in the city before breaking out, but they were soon attacked from the royal forces and defeated. Many nobles fled, including the leader of the Angevins, Empress Matilda, who was described as half dead by the time she reached the safety of Gloucester. After a few days, Empress Matilda's remaining supporters started to arrive. When the news reached her that Robert had been captured, her heart must have sank. The man who put everything on the line to support her was now in the enemy's hands. The only trade she could offer for her brother was their cousin, King Stephen. While the Empress thought about her next move, Earl Robert was confined in Rochester. Queen Matilda offered Robert his freedom and a lucrative place in the royal court once King Stephen was freed. Robert refused, and the sweet talk ended. He was then threatened to be sent to Boulogne and imprisoned for the rest of his days. Robert might have scoffed at such a threat, as if he knew something were to happen to him, then something would happen to King Stephen. After a short negotiation, King Stephen and Robert were released in the autumn of 1141, a difficult decision for Empress Matilda to make, but she needed Robert to lead her cause, at least until her sons were of age. Now the civil war had taken one step forward and two steps back. Now that King Stephen was free, he sought to rebuild his power base as quickly as he could by having his kingship reaffirmed by the clergy. A slightly awkward reunion with his brother, the Bishop Henry, was smoothed over, with the bishop grovelling and remarking he only aided Empress Matilda due to fear of reprisals if he did not help her. By December, King Stephen was crowned again at Canterbury, with a good number of nobles attending, but also a fair number missing. But his authority as king was now re-established. John of Worcester summarises the war. During the whole of the ensuing year, in all parts of the kingdom and country, pillage of the poor, slaughter of men, and violations of the churches. The only success of the year was in Normandy, as Empress Matilda's husband, Geoffrey of Anjou, was slowly winning ground in the territory. By 1142, the civil war can be summed up with siege warfare, as there were no real pitched battles like at Lincoln, apart from a small battle in 1143. Sieges was something both sides had plenty of practice in, but sieges were a big investment in manpower and resources, something Empress Matilda was now lacking in. She needed help and appealed to her husband in Normandy for aid. While the Angevins were busy sending correspondence between England and Normandy, King Stephen was visiting the north of England to reinstate royal authority, as the north of England had been relatively untouched by the Civil War. In April, King Stephen arrived in the city of Northampton, where he became dangerously ill with an unknown condition. The sources state that his imprisonment may have caused this illness. Regardless, he was bedbound for a few months, and this inactivity led to rumours that he was dying or dead. With the king ill, the first few months of 1142 were peaceful, as neither side were actively campaigning, so Empress Matilda's letters reached her husband perhaps quicker than they might have done if war parties were travelling around the south of England. Geoffrey replied and stated that he would only listen to Robert's account of the war's progress, and in person. Robert didn't like the idea of travelling to France. The thought of leaving Empress Matilda without his counsel and leadership worried him, as well as the danger of sailing to Normandy. Yet he was reassured knowing that King Stephen was ill. Robert set off for Normandy, sailing from Wareham, while Empress Matilda travelled towards the safety of Oxford Castle. The castle at Oxford was a stone structure, built a few years after the Norman conquest of England, using the existing Anglo-Saxon defences as the base fortification. The castle itself had a natural barrier in the form of a stream off the River Thames, thus the Empress would be easily protected and safe from harm until Robert returned. Another benefit in Empress Matilda staying at Oxford was if King Stephen were to die from his illness, she could jump on the opportunity and quickly capture Winchester before marching towards London. But there were a few risks in her staying at Oxford. One, she was on the fringes of her territory, making it easier for King Stephen's forces to reach her, while her own troops would take longer to reach her. But, as we've seen in the course of the Civil War, Empress Matilda had taken plenty of risks in her time. Now, she just had to wait and see what news Robert could bring. Over in Northampton, King Stephen is still bedbound, but after the Christian festival of Easter, he recovered so quickly, as though he had only just awakened from sleep. He vigorously and boldly shook himself out of sluggish inaction. With the king recovered, he set about launching a new offensive. The first target was Cirencester Castle, which the king's forces took by surprise. With its capture, King Stephen ordered its complete destruction, and the castle was promptly demolished. The royal forces then moved south towards Wareham and again took the castle in rapid time. The Angevins' effectiveness without Robert was beginning to show. After plundering the town, King Stephen then made plans for his next moves. Our sources tell us that he knew Empress Matilda was staying at Oxford Castle, but they don't tell us how he knew she was there. King Stephen set out a plan to trap Empress Matilda and cut her off from reinforcements, while also besieging her at the same time. To accomplish this, he needed to secure outposts around Oxford, and as we've seen from King Stephen, capturing these outposts were easily done under his command. The outposts at Bampton and Radcott were captured in quick succession. With these outposts now occupied, King Stephen's encirclement of Oxford was nearly complete. By the 26th of September 1142, King Stephen's army were on the outskirts of Oxford. Getting inside the town would be difficult, as the river that flows through gave a natural protection, and the city's walls meant that taking the town would require siege equipment, items King Stephen lacked at the moment. But King Stephen was determined to take the town, as this was his best opportunity he had to end the war. The Angevins provoked the king's forces from their high fortifications before pelting them with arrows. The king then moved his army towards a ford in the river. He then crossed first or swam across according to the deeds of King Stephen, and encouraged his men to assault the approaching Angevin troops who were sallying forth from the city gate. The Angevin garrison were beaten back, and in the panic of fleeing into the town, King Stephen's men managed to enter the gatehouse, preventing the gate from closing. Now inside the town, chaos set in as the king's men assaulted the town. Fire raged, and the people of Oxford suffered the king's wrath. Many died and their homes were set alight. Empress Matilda could only watch from the safety of the castle as the town was burned and pillaged. She had seen this sight before at Winchester, and now it was happening again. She was trapped with no way out, no Robert to lead her to safety, nor her uncle King David of Scotland to give his advice and guidance. She had to escape on her own. The situation was now grim for Empress Matilda. She had been besieged before at Arundel Castle, but escaped thanks to clever negotiations. And she also escaped from Winchester thanks to her brother's sacrifice. Third time's the charm, so maybe this was the moment she would become the prisoner, as Oxford Castle was now completely surrounded. Two of our sources, the deeds of King Stephen and William of Malmesbury, both state that King Stephen's siege was so complete that he never feared of leaving until he had Empress Matilda captured. The Angevins had to act fast, or Empress Matilda would be captured. The closest Angevin stronghold nearest to Oxford was Wallingford Castle, where Brian Fitz-Count was rallying what force he could, but the force he assembled was not enough to challenge the king directly. The Scottish King David was too far away in Scotland to be of any help, and Robert was on his way back from Normandy. But even when he landed, it would take time to gather enough troops to march on Oxford. The Empress would not just sit idly by and wait for the siege to end. She acted as she had before, with determination to solve the crisis she was in. She encouraged the garrison and fortified the castle. She was active as much as any commander could be, yet the siege dragged on for a few months and provisions were running low. To make matters worse, King Stephen had brought up siege engines, which were bombarding the castle. Empress Matilda never received any news of a relief force, as she was completely cut off. There was only one option left: attempt to escape. Her escape plan involved crossing the snowy and icy Thames River in the middle of December. This event is romanticised, and several chroniclers offer different accounts of how she escaped. One account states she slid down a rope at night over the walls. Another says she rode out from a small gate with 4 knights all dressed in white to blend in with the environment. Whichever way she escaped, the plan worked, and she made her way to the river, which was now frozen solid. Crossing the hazardous river on foot, the ice never broke and she escaped, with the sounds of shouting and trumpets blaring behind her. She then walked 6 miles to Abingdon, and after gathering a few horses, she rode to the safety of Wallingford Castle. The Empress had pulled off a miraculous escape again, but there was no major victory to be had, as Oxford Castle soon surrendered. The only good news she received was that Robert had brought back from Normandy her eldest son and heir, Henry. Only 9 years old, but he would soon grow up to lead his own cause, as the war would shift from placing the Empress on the throne, and instead the fight for Henry's right to rule England.